Okay, hi everybody. Welcome back to my kitchen on Saturday morning, Saturday before Easter. 2 eggs, really nice. My chickens are making me happy right now. Yeah, I just got in from walking the dogs, and it's cold out there. It's nice and sunny, but there's a really strong north wind blowing down the Chilkat River, and it's cold. I think because there's just so much ice, still up in the mountains. It's like blasting like a freezer down there. So sorry if my nose is running a little and my eyes are. I was thinking this morning a little bit about gratitude and how I've been feeling a little kind of guilty because, I have so much to be thankful for right now. When every time I turn on the news or listen to it, and maybe even where you are, really bad things are happening. And, it's not numbers of cases, it's not numbers of deaths, it's people, like mothers and daughters and sisters and uncles and whatever. So there's just a lot of grief there, and a lot of uncertainty too. But I think, and I wasn't going to read this chapter. I was going to wait till after Easter because there's a lot in here that's really hard, and but at the same time, I thought, well, that's kind of where we are right now, because there's also a lot in here that I'm really grateful for, and I think you can hold those two things simultaneously. I don't think they're necessarily separate. I don't know. I'm not really a philosopher, but these are just some things that I've been thinking about. So this is called, we're now at chapter 7 of Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs. And this chapter is called You Are Going to Get Well. And the epigram is, let the whole world see and know that things which were cast down are being raised up. And that's from the Book of Common Prayer. I would like to turn back the clock and start this week over again. The second time around, there would be no young people's late night party, no drinking, no driving, and no one would be in a casket or in jail. I would not be at a funeral in the high school gym filled with grief-stricken friends and neighbors of both young men. And I do mean stricken. Sometimes it's not a cliche. Most of the kids look like they had been hit in the chest with a 2x4. I would not have had to witness a young man crumble as he tried to give the eulogy for his best friend, or read the essay that was written by the dead boy when he was 14 and carried in his mother's wallet ever since. There are lots of reasons people under 21 shouldn't drink alcohol. When kids drink, it puts a damper on what they could have been. That's what he had written 6 years ago. I would not have had to listen to the same carpenter I'd heard swearing and laughing through the bushes while he was building a garage next door choke, I love that kid. Or listen to the high school science teacher say of the dead boy, the first time I laid my eyes on him, I knew, there's a smart one. You could tell just by looking in his eyes. They had mischief, quickness, and intellect. In my revised version of this week's events, the ambulance call at 3 a.m. 7 days ago would have been because old Mr. Ackerman's hip popped out again. If I could time travel, I'd go to that party myself and take all the car keys and throw them deep in the raspberry bushes, and I bet every mother in town would come with me and lock arms to surround that home so no one could leave. But we are too late now. Instead, we listened to the foreign yet familiar words of the ancient Tlingit crying songs. Instead, we heard Mayor Jan Hill announced, there's no place in the world that comes together like this community does in a crisis. Jan is the aunt of the boy who died, and without children of her own, was as close to him as an aunt could be, maybe even closer, since in Tlingit culture, this relationship is very tight. While she is right, of course she is, I would really rather we not keep finding it out this way. After the service, the crowd walked in the cold gray afternoon to the cemetery in a completely silent parade, right down the middle of the road on that long mile from the school to the graveyard, behind the slow-moving pickup bearing the boy in a box. I wished I had not seen the father of the young man in the casket put his arm around the mother of the kid who put him there and walk along with her. If I could, I would even erase that brave and holy act of mercy and wrench back the days, hours, minutes, and seconds of the hands on the clock of fate or chance or destiny or stupidity or whatever you want to call it, and begin this week over again. Then one boy wouldn't be in the cemetery and another wouldn't be in jail, destined for prison. As my mother would have said, there but for the grace of God go we all. The big suburban was full of partying young people, nice kids from old Haynes families, which is to say that they were connected to nearly everyone in town in one way or another. When it went off the road in the wee hours of a September morning at the turn by the freight transfer company on the 5K running route that the high school cross-country team calls the town loop. The speed limit there is 25 miles an hour. We must have just missed it. Someone must have been running to call the ambulance by the time I was driving a few blocks away on empty streets under a huge full moon to the ferry terminal to catch a boat south to meet with the running team that I coach. I was driving to a meet with the running team that I coach. The ferry doesn't always just have regular hours. It's judged sometimes by the tides and how it all works. So it's not uncommon to catch a ferry very late at night, 1, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, whatever. The volleyball team and their coaches were on the same ferry. At least 2 families had driven by the wreck and flashing lights on their way to the terminal. They said it didn't look good. Another witness said they heard someone was being medevaced to Juneau. That meant it might not be too bad. The life-saving flights usually fly right over Juneau, straight to Seattle. But that hadn't been the case. The next afternoon, before we arrived in Sitka, we learned one boy was dead from injuries sustained in the crash, and the driver had been drinking and was charged with manslaughter. I had to tell the girls and the boys traveling with me that one of their friends or relatives was dead, and another of their friends or relatives was being held responsible. Everybody was crying for both boys. The driver is a friend of our family's who ran on my team when he was in school. My older daughters worked as deckhands on his fishing boat. The young man killed was also their friend and someone we knew and liked. It may be hard to believe with the universal cell service most places have, but 2 short messages were all that came through to the ferry in those hours. One from a teen in town relaying what had happened, and another from my husband confirming it. The purser let us use the ship-to-shore phone line so the suburban driver's little sister could make that painful connection home. Months later, the young man at the wheel would be sentenced to 15 years in an Arizona prison. Due to a lack of space in Alaska, many of our prisoners are sent out of state, making the incarceration even more difficult, since it's harder for families and friends to visit and support them. It's hard to breathe when something like this happens. It can make you so weak you can't stand. The Tlingit crying songs at the funeral helped, and I was glad I was home from our meet in time for it. Tlingit people believe that the ancient laments release the grief so that it can't steal the breath of the mourners, especially a mother, wife, or aunt. The songs also appeal for the assistance of all the family and friends now in the spirit world. And first, before I go any further, a disclaimer is in order. I have enough understanding of Tlingit culture to know that this is where I must apologize in advance for any mistakes I may make interpreting it and for unintentionally offending anyone. Throughout this story and others still to come, I have been very careful to be as accurate as I can And I've checked with my Tlingit friends, the local museum, the texts on Tlingit culture and language, but I am by no means an expert. I am a neighbor, an admirer, and I hope a sharp observer. I'm sharing these events and customs with you not because I know them better than anyone else, but because they moved me and because they helped heal my friends and me. Also, knowing about these Tlingit traditions just may make you stronger in the places that you didn't know you were weak. That said, I now think that by singing the crying songs, my Native Alaska neighbors and those of us who sort of hum along in that crowded school gym called on all the Tlingit ancestors to reach out from the clouds, the sea, the rivers, trees, rocks, and ice, the ground we walk on, and the earth we buried that boy in, to catch our song of sorrow on the exhale and hold on to it tightly, keeping it with them, so that the survivors would be able to inhale life-giving air. History helps the crying songs do their magic as well, since the same tunes and lyrics have been sung for centuries. There is a kind of cold comfort in knowing that terrible things happen in each generation, in every tribe or clan, in every community or family, and that for thousands of years, across time and terrain, human beings have survived them, and that most of us still wake up just about every morning with the hope that this day will be a good one. Austin Hammond, the late chief of the Chilkoot tribe, once blessed a cross-country running team I coached by reminding us that the soles of our ancestors would be pushing up on the bottoms of our feet as we ran to make the race easier. I always think about that when I run with the team in Sitka's Totem Park, and of all the spirits of all the people who have walked and run the paths for hundreds of years. They are so close I can feel them, not just with my feet, but in my still healing bones. Something about the place makes me whisper, even when I'm coaching kids there. Totem Park is officially called Sitka National Historical Park. It was dedicated in 1910, but its trails and woodlands have been popular since the 1890s, and the area has had local significance since at least 1804, when there was a bloody battle for Sitka between the local Tlingits and the Russian sailors who helped protect the then capital city of Russian Alaska. The park begins at the end of the sidewalk, right on the edge of downtown. It is 113 forested acres with wide, well-drained sandy dirt paths winding through shaggy hemlocks, giant Sitka spruce trees, and 15 equally, if not more, imposing totem poles. It's usually wet there and often misty. It was raining hard when my team did a practice run at the 3-mile race course, looping through several of the park's trails and over a wooden footbridge spanning a salmon spawning stream, ripe with rotting fish. Talk about hard to breathe. The stench made our eyes water. This September morning, my shoes and socks were so cold and wet that my good foot was numb. The cross-country team and our community, like the kids in that wrecked Suburban, are made up of Tlingits, part Tlingits, and the children or grandchildren of modern Alaska pioneers. In this way, we are not so different from the people who fought on both sides of that battle in this park all those years ago. I wanted to tell the team that their history and culture should give them strength and wisdom. I hope to say something inspirational, wise, and good, so they'd remember my words as I had Austin Hammond's. I decided to tell them about the Tlingits who survived the Battle of Sitka and ran back into the dense woods and steep mountains on Baranof Island all the way to Peril Strait, a wilderness trek that even today, with modern hiking gear, plenty of food, and a GPS, is hugely difficult and rarely done. I would remind the kids that these totem poles and the park itself are perfect examples of beauty born of pain, of both the natural world and humankind's ability to transform tragedy into splendor. The problem was that I couldn't articulate all of that without sounding more Hallmark than Yeats. I wished I were a poet right then. I also wanted to tell my runners that a good reason to stay fit and strong is in case they ever have to race for their lives the way the Sitka Clinkets had, or the people in the World Trade Center on another September day, or the Von Trapps, that singing family from The Sound of Music who trotted over the mountains to escape the Nazis. I wanted to remind them to get in shape and stay there so that if they too are ever hit by a truck, they might have the strength to survive it. I was focused on putting these thoughts all together in a hopefully not too trite word package to deliver before the next day's meeting when everyone suddenly stopped short in front of a perfect bright green lawn in the middle of the dark woods. The site of the Clinket fort that was attacked by the Russians is oddly out of place among the trees, ferns, and devil club bushes of the northern rainforest. A friend who had lived in Sitka told me that the grass was the killing field during the battle. She said it was so saturated with blood that trees could never grow there again. I have not found that story in any of the park literature, so it may not be true. But I hope it is, because I want to believe that nature is not always indifferent to our suffering, that something in this ground or the cedar logs used for the totem poles keeps our pain. Maybe remember would be a better word, remembers our pain. Before I could share that story or any wise thoughts at all, the team took off back down the trail. It was raining so hard they needed to keep moving or they'd get hypothermia, or at least a bad cold. I hobbled along as fast as I could, but didn't catch them until they had run out of the park, past the last totems, the 100-year-old cottages lining the streets, the arts and crafts style buildings of Sheldon Jackson College, the old yellow-planked Russian bishop's house, past the crowded boat harbor, through a busy downtown intersection with Sitka's lone stoplight, and into a steamy Subway sandwich shop, the only place to take 17 drenched and sweaty teens for lunch. We had jogged through 200 years in 3 blocks. No wonder I was having trouble distinguishing past and present. That night, I lay tucked inside my sleeping bag on the floor of a Sitka high school classroom, listening to the kids breathing in their sleep. I wondered if I could pick up ringworm from the mats they had given us to soften the floor. They had been previously in the wrestling room. And why there were no windows. I was breathing in everyone's exhalations. I was also thinking that maybe I was getting too old for this public sleeping. When that happens, I'll have to quit coaching. Group camping on ferries and in schools is part of team sports in Southeast Alaska. All the schools are separated by the waters of the Inside Passage, so we travel by ferry or plane to away meets, staying in the host community, sometimes in homes, sometimes in schools or churches, overnight if the ferry schedule and the weather cooperate, but more often for 2 or 3 days. Some trips lately have taken us a week. The ferry ride to Sitka alone lasted 36 hours. And there I lay, breathing used air and feeling imaginary ringworms burrowing in my neck, and thinking some more about what I'd say in the morning before the race. Then I said my prayers, with a longer list of people to bless than usual at the end, since I included every runner and at least one former runner. It was still raining when we jogged from the school to the park to warm up and stretch the next morning. Before the race began, I spoke to the team. I said to run like a Clinket warrior, like a Russian sailor, like a Sitka black-tailed deer. I told my young runners to be grateful, be very, very grateful for spirits past and present, for strong legs and good hearts and the mud on their shoes and the sweat in their eyes, for each other, for this place, and for all the blessings of this life, especially for the rain on their sweet, wet heads right now. That's the best advice I could give them. The totems and trees, the rotting salmon and their eggs buried in the silt until next spring would have to give the rest of this lesson. A few weeks later, I was back in Sitka again for the raising of a new totem pole on the other side of town from Totem Park. This was not a copy of an old pole or a traditionally themed modern pole. It was a different kind of pole. In the old days, there were 4 main styles of totem poles: Crest poles depicted the story of a family ancestry. History poles told the story of a clan or group of families. Legend poles documented important cultural tales that shouldn't be forgotten. And memorial poles were carved when someone died and often contained the ashes of their subject. The collection in Totem Park was there because in 1905, the then governor for the District of Alaska, John Green Brady, placed the poles in the popular town park among the trees and trails, much as they still are today. Governor Brady had collected the totems from several villages in southeast Alaska with the help of what was left of the local native leaders and the Coast Guard. And this is, I think, why Alaska especially is taking this so very, very seriously right now, the virus. At the turn of the century, many of the once thriving native communities were ghost towns, thanks to the introduction of civilization by fur and fish traders and missionaries. Western diseases and alcohol wiped out whole tribes, and after that, much of what remained of tribal life was destroyed in the name of God. Governor Brady himself played a part in this near extinction. He had been a street kid in New York City when he was taken in by the Children's Aid Society and sent on an orphan train to adoptive parents in Indiana. The Greens, thus his middle name, sent him to Yale and Union Theological Seminary. He ended up a Presbyterian missionary in Sitka, of all places, which was by then no longer Russian, but now the American capital of what was called the Alaska District. The Reverend Brady believed God had found the Greens and they had saved him from a life of crime. He also believed that the Alaska natives he preached to could be similarly saved if they became civilized. That is, baptized, educated, dressed, and housed like what he thought of as good Presbyterian Americans. He did his best to accomplish all of this, and his best was pretty good, or bad. He advocated removing children from their parents and villages to be schooled in Western ways, banning large celebrations or potlatches, denouncing native shamans or spiritual leaders, and prohibiting the speaking of the Tlingit language as well as native songs and dances. He was pleased with how well his converts assimilated. He believed he could save more native souls if he built more residential schools and orphanages and had even more books, medical supplies, clothes, and food. The church and government leaders back east, though, did not support him. They wouldn't spend any more money on his mission. Also, even after his native students were educated and dressed in Western clothes, the local authorities would not let them attend public schools, which angered him. So the Reverend Brady quit missionary work and became a trader, buying and selling, among other goods, native art and curios. I'm sure there was much more to his exit from church work, but that's all the history I could find. Later, he was appointed judge and served as governor. As a missionary, he would have approved of the church ban on the carving of new totem poles. Yet, as governor, he collected them and preserved them in what I think must be the most beautiful and reverent setting in the world. I prefer to think that he came to feel guilty about his role in their near demise and that he had a change of heart toward the people who carved them. But that may not be accurate. In fact, history would probably say it isn't. He may have simply appreciated the way they looked. My native friends might say that it was the power of the spirits in the poles and all around them that moved Governor Brady, whether he knew it or not. I do know that when you walk in Totem Park today and see where Governor Brady set the poles, some are now replicas as the originals have been moved inside to protect them from the elements, and how the light filters down through the spruce boughs, catching the ovoid eye or the hook of a beak or the spring of a totemic bear, you know there's much more to them than wood and paint. You can feel it. 100 years after Governor Brady saved what he thought were the last totem poles in the world, it was time to raise a new one, and I was helping. This pole, like all poles, has a name. It is Ye-ik-kwa-nix. And again, I apologize for mispronouncing that. In Tlingit, or you are going to get well in English. It was carried about 4 blocks in the relentless Sitka rain from the tent it was carved under to the front of the Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium Community Health Services Building. I know, it's a big word. The consortium is called SEARCH, S-E-A-R-H-C, and pronounced Search. Our clinic in Haines is a Search clinic. On a campus that includes the Mount Edgecombe Public Boarding School for rural high schoolers, a hospital, and a drug and alcohol treatment center. The Native-run nonprofit organization operates clinics in most Southeast Alaska communities, including the new one in Klukwan, the village about 20 miles north of my house, and the old one in Haines. In 1975, 16 Tlingit women, many of them grandmothers, all but one from small villages, formed the consortium to provide better Native and rural health care. And by small villages, I mean ones with fewer than 1,000 residents. Klukwan has about 150. These women didn't hold a grudge. From the beginning, they decided that their Tlingits would serve non-Native people too. SEARCH is so successful, it has replaced the Indian Health Service in Southeast Alaska. The consortium's board of directors remains mostly Tlingit grandmothers and aunties, a Native term of endearment and respect. They have recently added dental care to their clinics so that their grandchildren won't be shy about smiling. Wayne Price has a smile as wide as a river and as bright as a full moon. He designed this new totem pole, carved it, and supervised others who also worked on it as part of a project funded by SEARCH called Kutya, or Journey to Wellness. Wayne has declared this a new kind of totem pole. He says it doesn't tell a story, illustrate history, or memorialize a person, but rather is designed to heal. In keeping with Tlingit tradition, he asked the elders' permission to carve it and their guidance in raising it properly. Native people believe that you can't just stick a totem pole any old place, any old way. There are proper songs, proper prayers, proper thank yous, and proper gifts that go with the raising. The Tlingit people pay as much attention to honor and tradition, or maybe more, than the British royal family. While Wayne maintains that this pole splits with the past in many ways, I'm not sure the new pole is that far removed from the one standing in the nearby park. After all, Wayne's carving really does tell a story, illustrate history, and memorialize Tlingit women such as the ones who founded SEARCH. The act of carving it is the tale of both Wayne's trip from drinking to sober and of Tlingit survival. It's about his mission to help others, especially Native men, heal what ails them through culture, art, and Native American spirituality. It's pretty simple. Carving saved my life, Wayne says. Carving saved my life. Wayne has lived hard but managed to produce a lot of great art in spite of it. He has more than 24 totem poles to his credit. His silver and wood carvings are in many villages in Southeast Alaska, as well as in galleries and museums around the state and around the country. One of Mary and Warren Price's 11 children, he grew up in Haines, lost 3 brothers to untimely or accidental deaths, and has been married and divorced. A son, Stephen, named after one of his dead brothers, was there to help that day. Sherry, the woman he calls his soulmate and who would soon be his new wife, was also there with her son, Jeremy. Jeremy, whom Wayne dotes on, is restricted to a wheelchair as a result of his difficult birth. Now a teenager, he can't speak words, walk, or eat on his own, but he does understand everything you say. He laughs and makes other people laugh. He listens to books on tape. Later that night at the celebration potlatch for the pole raising, as tradition and the elders dictate, Wayne would perform a carver's dance in full Tlingit regalia, with sealskin moccasins on his feet, a red and black felt button blanket over his shoulders, a painted wooden hat tied on his head, and the black and white woven pouch of carving tools hanging from his belt. Then he would lift Jeremy out of his wheelchair, holding him in his arms as gently as Mary cradled Jesus in the Pieta, and they would dance and dance while the skin drum beat, native voices chanted, and the rest of us bore witness in silent awe. Jeremy is well on the inside. It's his outside that causes him trouble. With Wayne, it has often been the opposite. At 49, he is strong and clear-eyed, but for much of his life, he followed a pattern typical of the so-called boom and bust days of his Haines youth. From longshoring, Wayne and his father loaded lumber ships for the sawmill, to commercial fishing, logging, and carving cedar with some of the region's great totem pole carvers at the Haines nonprofit, Alaska Indian Arts. The pattern was the same: work really hard and play even harder, sweat, then party. That was how many Alaskan guys lived. It's how many still do, and it's why we keep losing them. We almost lost Wayne too, who at one low point realized that he couldn't just put a cork in the bottle, as he said, and go off to carve another pole. He had to walk away from the drinking and the drugs for good. He had the vision for what he sometimes calls the Wellbriety pole shortly after that in a sweat lodge in the lower 48, where he went to steam the poisons out of his body. He didn't just see the design. He even had a vision about the wood chips that would fall from the adze while he carved it. Wayne's ancestors' spirits told him that each chip would represent a soul lost to alcohol, drugs, HIV, violence, poverty, and even war. They were pretty talkative spirits, he said. Here is the design Wayne saw in that steamy vision and later carved. A raven is on top of the pole because in Tlingit lore, raven created the world. Next comes the shaman or priest, or some would say medicine man. He has the power to heal the body and soul and to see and hear what other people can't. Wayne said his pole was the first one to defy Governor Brady's and others' long ago ban on listening to shamans and honoring their role in Tlingit culture. The wolf is next, because in Wayne's sweat lodge vision, a wolf ran back into the dark places of addiction, persecution, illness, and violence, and with the determination of an EMT, crawling through the window of an overturned Suburban, used his teeth to drag the ailing person out into the light. The woman below the wolf figure represents the mother of us all. In Tlingit culture, family lines are traced through the mother's side. It's the women, Wayne reminded his helpers, who hold our people together. Just like Tlingit Mayor Jan Hill did that September day when she officiated at her nephew's funeral in the Haines High Gym. When visitors came to the carving tent while Wayne was working, he invited them all, from camera-pointing cruise ship passengers to homeless drifters, to write a name on a wood chip and place it into a special pile. A student from a tiny interior Alaska Native village attending the Sitka boarding school wrote names on 20 chips. Can you imagine that kind of sorrow? A teenager with that much grief. The chips were like crying songs you could hold on to. But I was about to pick up and hold on to something much larger. We were all there to literally lift the pole and carry it to its new permanent home. I looked at the wet wood of Wayne's finished carving as it lay on its back on sturdy sawhorses in the rain, from the shiny metal ring in the raven's beak at the top to the raspberry-painted toenails of the strong woman on the bottom. It is a wonder. The larger-than-life-size woman at the base is a first, as traditional totem poles featured men, Wayne said. She must be 8 or 10 feet tall, and despite the old saying, low man on the totem pole, the figure on the bottom of a Tlingit pole holds a place of high honor. Some carvers say the highest honor. A native man next to me touched the woman's muscular cedar arm and said, "It's a Tlingit David." We were an interesting crowd, about half native and half non-native, including artsy types from Sitka, doctors and staff from the Search Health Centers, fishermen, teachers, addicts and recovering addicts, clergy, Wayne's family and friends from Haines and Cluckwan, and even some sailors from the nearby Coast Guard base, the moral descendants, perhaps, of Governor Brady's totem moving crew. When Wayne realized how heavy the pole was and how difficult it would be to move, he contacted the fire department. The guys were happy to help, but since they were technically on a call, they were required to wear full firefighting gear. There were also a lot of wet dogs and little children splashing in the puddles and running around in the rain. Roberta Kitka, one of those Search women leaders I told you about, remained dry and serene under her broad umbrella. There was no mud at all on her immaculate outfit that was all red and black, the colors favored by Tlingit artists, and accented with carved totemic design silver jewelry. She told me she had labored for years to help Wayne give birth to this project. Looking at the pole, she whispered, "It makes chills run up and down my spine." Well, it made shooting pains run up and down mine. I hoped my pelvis repairs would hold. I had figured our help was going to be largely ceremonial. I thought a couple of front-end loaders would actually move the pole. Wayne didn't. He had faith that we could lift, carry, and raise it ourselves. He didn't have a backup plan or even a safety net of any kind. If we dropped it, we'd have to pick it up. If we broke it, we'd have to repair it. If we couldn't carry it, it wasn't going anywhere. Not only that, but everything was cold, wet, and slippery. Still, Wayne and Roberta and all the Search grandmothers and aunties wanted the world to know that it's going to take some heavy lifting by many people to heal what ails Tlingit culture, which, judging from what happened next, is in pretty good shape to begin with. About 140 people gathered 4 deep on each side of 18 4x4s and used them to lift the 41-foot-long, 4,000-pound cedar totem pole and carry it from the shelter it was carved in down the street and to the lawn it would stand on. Wayne was a lot calmer than my husband Chip is when he pulls our 28-foot sailboat out of the water and we use a truck and a trailer. Wayne had his crew, half a dozen native men with red bandanas tied around their necks to identify them, hand out white knit fishing gloves to help us grip the wet 4x4s. We found our places as someone down in the front yelled to Wayne, who was standing on a sawhorse, "How are we supposed to lift it? With our forearms or our hands or what?" "With all your heart," Wayne said. He didn't say then that this was the heaviest pole he'd ever worked on. It had uncharacteristically required block and tackle to shift it during the carving. Wayne believes that the extra weight in the wood is from the heavy burdens it absorbed from people who visited it and worked on it during the carving. For 6 months, healing circles met daily at the carving tent, plus all those folks in all kinds of troubles who came to the pole to touch it and cry or pray or tell it their stories and sign a memorial wood chip. Mayor Hill, who is also the president of the Search board these days, said earlier that she was drawn to the pole by its healing powers. She said being near it made her feel better about her losses. While I was lifting the pole, I saw her at the edge of the crowd. She was recovering from a broken ankle. Her foot was in a boot cast. She couldn't join us lifters, but she was watching us from underneath an umbrella. Maybe she was thinking about the husband she had lost to cancer and about the nephew she had lost in that tragic car wreck. No doubt she would have liked them to be part of this. When our eyes met, there was a jolt, like a shock. I didn't know her well enough to know how to react. It felt so personal. Maybe I was imagining it, but it was as if we were thinking the same thoughts about the same two spirits. Wayne broke the spell with a shout. 1, 2, 3, left, and the pole lurched. I was grateful for the burly firemen on either side of me. There is no way we are going to move forward, I thought. But we did, slowly, to the beat of a skin drum and the chanting of Tlingit songs. These were not crying songs. They were working songs, happy songs. They were more like rowing songs. From above, we must have resembled some kind of Viking ship. We shuffled forward and made it past 2 of the houses on the slick, rainy street before sawhorses were tucked underneath the pole. We lowered it gently on Wayne's command and shook out our arms, stretched our backs, and adjusted sopping wet rain gear. I pulled off my hood. There was no point. I was soaked, and it only made it harder to see and hear. When we began again, my arms trembled. I thought of Wayne's stories about the pole taking the weight from people and decided to give it some of my worries. All around me, I could feel, or thought I could feel, people doing the same thing. I'm not sure if it worked, but I know that after the break, our movement was much easier. I felt stronger. The pole was lighter. Maybe we had mastered the awkward lifting and shuffling motion. Or maybe, because Wayne and Roberta and all the people around me believed it could heal, the pole did. Maybe by carrying it and sharing its story and its load, we brought out the power we already had to heal ourselves. I couldn't think more about that then, though, because we had to pivot. That's right, all 140 of us and that 2-ton pole had to turn off the road and step up an 8-inch curb and slog across the grass to the place where we would plant it forever. What used to be a lawn quickly mashed into boot-sucking muck. We slipped and the pole slid on the 2x4s. Luckily, its weight made any movement very slow. Wayne yelled, "Whoa!" and we regrouped, steadying the pole. Behind me, a petite, frizzy-haired blonde woman wearing a wet fleece beret said, "Now we know how Stonehenge got there." A tall native man in yellow rubber rain gear next to her replied in a guttural Tlingit accent, "We're not there yet." Wayne and his crew directed us to tilt the bottom end of the pole into the hole already dug for it, and using sawhorses and blocks of wood to brace it, we raised the top end about 8 feet before setting it down so Wayne could tie long ropes around it with towels padding the contact points to protect the carving and paint from chafing. The 2 in the front were tossed over a lashed log crossbar that Wayne had built for this purpose, kind of like a giant swing set. The other ropes led from it to the back and sides. The elders, dressed in red, black, and blue button blankets and wearing ceremonial wooden hats and holding carved staves, said a Christian prayer and sang a Tlingit song and dropped 2 coins into the hole, a Wellbriety token and a Sacagawea dollar. The rain finally quit as Wayne cued the front lines, and the crowd, which was standing so close together that we were all touching, leaned back into each one slowly, sort of like in a tug of war. The 2 sides were pulled taut in the same way to keep the pole balanced as it raised. The back lines were held tight too, in case we got too eager and pulled it up past the center point and it tipped over forward. Then the pole rose a few feet, swayed above the block and tackle, and stopped. The raven on top pointed heavenward. A live eagle perched on a nearby telephone pole sang her encouragement. The Tlingit people believe, and their tradition requires, that all actions are reciprocated. I'll tell you more about that later. Now you need to know only that the real eagle calling to the carved raven on the pole was a very good sign, a proper sign. Wayne noticed, so did the elders, and so did anyone paying attention, which was most of us. Of course, we all knew it was a blessing. Some of us believed the eagle's encouragement was what finally raised the raven-crowned pole. But like most actions that rely on faith, it still took plenty of our own muscle and ingenuity. I watched then as Wayne looked away from the calling eagle with a nod and hollered, "Pull harder!" The black wooden raven with the brass, stars, copper sun, and aluminum moon ring flashing in its beak soared up and over our heads. It felt as if the pole were raising itself. Wayne ran back and forth, signaling for slack or tension in our lines until, guided by sight and a plumb bob, he pronounced the pole upright and true. A dozen men grabbed nearby shovels and, working as fast as they could while we all held on tight to the lines, filled the hole with rocks, mud, and gravel. There was no concrete to be poured, no steel bar reinforcing that pole, no wires supported the anchor, just an 8-foot tongue of wood below the bottom of the carving. How will it stay up? Wayne trusted the old carvers who did it this way for hundreds of years, allowing the weight of the pole to secure itself. Or at least he hoped the old guys were right. He instructed us to ease the ropes but not let go, and to be prepared to pull hard again in order to catch the pole if it didn't stand on its own. The totem pole was so tall, so massive, so heavy, and so beautiful, it was hard to believe that we had just put it there. Harder still to believe it would stay. When the rope slackened, though, it didn't even wobble. It's a magnificent thing, inside and out. But even so, I would rather it hadn't been carved. I would rather Wayne and all of his ancestors had never needed to heal any pain at all. In the same way, I wished I had never seen the father of that dead young man put his arm around the mother of the young man who accidentally killed him. I wonder if to be human is to know that we can't ever banish pain and ugliness from the world, only learn from it and create something beautiful and good out of it, like the newest totem pole in Sitka, the one called "You Are Going to Get Well." And if you ever see it, you will believe that's possible. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice Easter, if that's something you celebrate, or a nice weekend wherever you are, and that you find some comfort in hanging out with me. I know it helps me to be with you, and so I really appreciate that. And probably not going to read one on Easter Sunday, just to sort of honor that. And but I'll be back on Monday or Tuesday. I've got a column I'm supposed to write on Monday, but I'll try to see what I can do. Okay? And again, please take care of yourself and be kind and tender with each other. Everybody's having a little struggle right now, aren't we? Okay, I'll see you next time.